The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as King Edmund VII walked through the grand corridors with heavy steps. His crown felt heavier than usual, weighing down not just his head but his entire spirit. For months, whispers had echoed through the palace walls about Queen Consort, Helena's secret meetings with foreign diplomats, and her mysterious, late-night phone calls. Edmund had married Helena 5 years ago. Against the wishes of his advisors and much of the royal family, she was a commoner, a brilliant lawyer who had captured his heart during a charity gala. Their love story had been celebrated worldwide, giving hope to millions that true love could overcome any barrier. But now, as Edmund held the damning photographs in his trembling hands, he wondered if it had all been an elaborate deception. The photographs showed Helena in intimate conversation with Ambassador Victor Petrov from the neighboring kingdom of Valdoria, Ravencrest's longtime rival. Intelligence reports suggested she had been passing sensitive information about military positions and trade agreements. The evidence was overwhelming, yet Edmund's heart refused to accept what his mind knew to be true. Palace staff had noticed changes in Helena's behavior over the past year. She had become secretive, often dismissing her usual attendance and requesting privacy for hours at a time. Her personal secretary, Margaret, had reluctantly come forward with concerns about encrypted messages and suspicious financial transactions. Even Helena's closest friend, Lady Catherine, had expressed worry about the Queen Consort's recent mood swings and paranoid behavior. As Edmund entered his private study, he found his trusted advisor, Lord Harrison, waiting with more documents. The intelligence service had intercepted communications that confirmed their worst fears. Helena had not only been sharing state secrets, but had also been planning to flee the country with sensitive documents that could compromise national security. The betrayal cut deeper than any sword could have managed. The weight of his decision pressed down on Edmund's shoulders like a mountain. He had to choose between his love for Helena and his duty to his people. The crown demanded justice, but his heart screamed for mercy. Outside his window, he could see the royal gardens where he and Helena had spent countless peaceful afternoons, planning their future together and discussing their dreams of modernizing the monarchy. News of the investigation had not yet reached the public, but Edmund knew it was only a matter of time. The palace's inner circle was buzzing with tension, and several high-ranking officials had already requested emergency meetings. The king's schedule was packed with briefings from security chiefs, legal advisors, and diplomatic representatives, all demanding immediate action. Helena remained unaware that her activities had been discovered. She continued her daily routines, attending charity events and royal functions with the same grace and composure that had made her beloved by the people. Her smile seemed genuine, her conversations natural, making Edmund question whether he truly knew the woman he had married. Had their entire relationship been built on lies, or had something changed Helena so dramatically that she had become unrecognizable? The palace's ancient walls had witnessed many scandals and betrayals throughout the centuries, but none had struck so close to the heart of the monarchy. Edmund's ancestors had faced wars, rebellions, and political upheavals, yet they had always maintained the dignity and strength of the crown. Now it fell to him to uphold that tradition, even if it meant destroying his own happiness in the process. As evening approached, Edmund made his decision. The evidence was undeniable, and his duty to the kingdom was clear. He would confront Helena that very night, giving her one last chance to explain her actions and perhaps find some way to salvage what remained of their marriage. Deep in his heart, he hoped for a miracle, some explanation that would make sense of the chaos and restore the trust that had been shattered. But his mind prepared for the worst possible outcome, knowing that sometimes love is not enough to overcome the weight of betrayal and the demands of duty. The clock struck midnight as King Edmund waited in the royal chambers, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Helena entered with her usual elegant stride, wearing the sapphire necklace he had given her on their wedding day. She smiled warmly, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break over their lives. Edmund's voice trembled as he began speaking, his words carefully chosen yet heavy with emotion. He placed the photographs on the ornate mahogany table between them, watching as Helena's face transformed from confusion to shock, then to something resembling relief. For a moment, silence filled the room like a thick fog, broken only by the distant chiming of the palace bells. Helena's confession came in broken sentences, tears streaming down her cheeks as she revealed the truth that had been eating away at her soul for months. She had not betrayed her country for money or political gain, but because Ambassador Petrov had threatened to expose her younger brother's gambling debts to dangerous criminals. Her brother Marcus had borrowed heavily from illegal sources, and his life was in serious danger. The Queen Consort explained how Petrov had approached her 6 months earlier with photographs of Marcus meeting with loan sharks and evidence of his mounting debts. The ambassador had offered to clear the debts and ensure Marcus's safety in exchange for seemingly harmless information about trade negotiations and social events. What had started as minor details had gradually escalated to more sensitive matters, with Petrov always threatening to abandon Marcus to his fate if Helena refused to cooperate. Edmund listened with a mixture of heartbreak and understanding, realizing that his wife had been trapped in an impossible situation. Helena had tried to protect her family while serving her new country, but the weight of her divided loyalties had torn her apart from the inside. She had considered telling Edmund countless times, but feared that involving him would only make things worse and potentially damage the kingdom's reputation. The revelation changed everything and nothing at the same time. While Edmund could understand Helena's motivation, the damage to national security remained real and significant. The information she had shared could still be used against Ravencrest, and other nations would question the monarchy's ability to protect sensitive information. The king found himself facing an impossible choice between personal forgiveness and public justice. Helena begged for forgiveness, not for herself, but for the chaos her actions had brought upon the kingdom. She offered to face any punishment, including exile or imprisonment, if it would help restore trust in the monarchy. Her biggest regret was not the consequences she would face, but the pain and embarrassment she had caused Edmund and the damage to his reputation as a leader. As dawn approached, Edmund made a decision that would shock the world. He would not hide Helena's actions or attempt to cover up the scandal. Instead, he would address the nation honestly, explaining the situation while announcing the consequences. The truth would be painful, but it would demonstrate the monarchy's commitment to justice and transparency, even when it meant sacrificing personal happiness. Helena spent her remaining hours in the palace writing letters to the people of Ravencrest, apologizing for her betrayal, and expressing her genuine love for the country that had welcomed her as their queen consort. She also wrote personal messages to the staff members who had served her faithfully, thanking them for their kindness and asking for their forgiveness. The palace staff worked frantically to prepare for the announcement that would change everything. Security measures were increased, media statements were prepared, and diplomatic channels were notified of the impending revelation. The atmosphere in the palace was tense, with everyone understanding that they were witnessing a historic moment that would be remembered for generations. By morning, both Edmund and Helena had accepted their fate. Their love had been real, but it had not been strong enough to overcome the complex web of loyalty, duty, and family obligation that had entangled them. As they shared their final private moments together, they both knew that their story was ending, but they also hoped that their honesty might prevent future tragedies and strengthen the monarchy's relationship with its people. The great throne room of Ravencrest Palace had never felt more imposing than on that fateful Tuesday morning. Representatives from every major news organization, diplomatic corps, and government department filled the ornate space. Their cameras and microphones pointed toward the golden throne where King Edmund would soon deliver the most difficult speech of his reign. Edmund entered the throne room alone, his military dress uniform impeccable despite the sleepless night he had endured. The crown jewels caught the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows, but their brilliance seemed dimmed by the gravity of the moment. Every step echoed through the hall as hundreds of eyes followed his movement to the throne. The king's voice carried across the silent room as he began his address, speaking directly to the cameras that would broadcast his words around the world. He explained the situation with painful honesty, revealing Helena's actions while also sharing the circumstances that had led to her impossible choice. His words were measured and clear, designed to inform rather than inflame, though he knew the impact would be devastating regardless. As Edmund spoke, Helena waited in her private chambers, surrounded by packed suitcases and the few personal items she would be allowed to take with her. Lady Catherine sat beside her, offering silent support as they listened to the king's address through a small radio. Every word felt like a nail in the coffin of the life Helena had built over the past 5 years. The reaction in the throne room was immediate and intense. Gasps echoed through the hall as the full scope of the betrayal became clear, followed by an uncomfortable silence as everyone processed the implications. Diplomatic representatives whispered urgently to their assistants, while journalists frantically took notes, knowing they were witnessing one of the most significant royal scandals in modern history. Edmund continued his speech by announcing Helena's immediate exile from Ravencrest, effective within the hour. He explained that while he understood her motivations, the security of the kingdom could not be compromised, and justice demanded consequences for her actions. The punishment was severe but fair, designed to demonstrate that even those closest to the throne were not above the law. The media erupted into chaos as soon as the king finished speaking. Questions were shouted from every corner of the room. Camera flashes created a lightning storm of activity, and security guards struggled to maintain order. Edmund remained standing at his throne, watching the mayhem unfold while internally preparing himself for the personal cost of his public duty. Outside the palace, crowds began to gather as news of the scandal spread through social media and emergency broadcasts. Some citizens expressed shock and betrayal, feeling that their trust in the royal family had been violated. Others showed sympathy for Helena's impossible situation, understanding that she had been caught between protecting her family and serving her adopted country. International reaction was swift and varied. Neighboring kingdoms expressed concern about the security implications, while some praised Edmund's transparency and decisive action. Trade partners and military allies requested emergency meetings to assess the potential damage to ongoing agreements and partnerships. The scandal had implications far beyond the palace walls. Helena's departure preparations were handled with careful discretion by the palace staff, many of whom had grown genuinely fond of the queen consort during her years of service. Margaret, her personal secretary, helped pack the last of her belongings while fighting back tears. The contrast between Helena's arrival as a beloved bride and her departure as an exile was heartbreaking for everyone involved. As the hour of departure approached, Edmund made his way to Helena's chambers for their final goodbye. The conversation was brief but intense, filled with apologies, forgiveness, and expressions of love that could not overcome the weight of duty and consequence. Both understood that they might never see each other again, making every word precious and painful. The palace courtyard filled with official vehicles and security personnel as preparations for Helena's departure reached their final stages. A small airplane waited at the private airfield, ready to transport her to a neutral country where she would begin her life in exile. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present as the woman who had once been destined to be queen prepared to leave everything behind. The palace gates opened slowly as the black limousine carrying Helena emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight. Hundreds of photographers and journalists lined the street, their cameras capturing every moment of the queen consort's final departure from the life she had known for 5 years. Helena sat silently in the back seat, her face composed despite the tears that threatened to fall. The journey to the airfield took 30 minutes, but for Helena it felt like a lifetime. She watched through tinted windows as the familiar landmarks of the capital city passed by, knowing she might never see them again. The children's hospital where she had volunteered every week, the university where she had given speeches about women's rights, the park where she and Edmund had taken their first public walk together as an engaged couple. At the airfield, a small crowd of palace staff had gathered to say their farewells. Despite the scandal, many of them had grown genuinely attached to Helena during her time as queen consort. They understood that she had made terrible mistakes, but they also knew her heart had been in the right place, even when her actions were wrong. Their presence provided some comfort during the most difficult moment of her life. Margaret, Helena's loyal secretary, handed her a sealed envelope just before boarding. Inside was a letter from the children at the hospital, expressing their love and gratitude for all the times she had visited them during their treatments. The letter reminded Helena that despite her failures as queen consort, she had also done genuine good during her years in the palace, touching many lives in positive ways. As the plane lifted off, Helena looked down at the kingdom that had briefly been her home. The palace appeared small from the air, its grandeur reduced to a distant glimmer among the sprawling city below. She thought about Edmund, who was probably dealing with the aftermath of his announcement, facing questions from advisors, diplomats, and angry citizens who felt betrayed by her actions. Back at the palace, Edmund stood in his study, staring out at the gardens where he and Helena had spent so many peaceful afternoons. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier, and he wondered if he had made the right choice. Part of him wanted to call the plane back, to find some way to forgive and move forward together. But he knew that his duty to the kingdom had to come first, no matter how much it cost him personally. The international media had picked up the story with unprecedented intensity. News channels around the world were broadcasting special reports about the scandal, analyzing every detail of Helena's actions and Edmund's response. Political experts debated the implications for the monarchy's future, while public opinion polls showed a divided population struggling to process the shocking revelations. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from outrage to sympathy. Some users condemned Helena as a traitor who had betrayed the trust of an entire nation. Others defended her actions, arguing that she had been placed in an impossible situation and had tried to protect her family while serving her adopted country. The debate raged across platforms, reflecting the complex emotions the scandal had stirred in people around the world. Ambassador Petrov, the man who had orchestrated Helena's downfall, found himself under intense international scrutiny. His home country of Valdoria initially tried to distance themselves from his actions, claiming he had acted without official authorization. However, intelligence services from multiple nations began investigating his activities, suspecting that the plot to compromise Helena had been part of a larger espionage operation. Helena's brother Marcus, whose gambling debts had triggered the entire crisis, issued a public statement taking responsibility for his role in the scandal. He expressed deep regret for the pain his actions had caused his sister and the kingdom of Ravencrest. Marcus also revealed that he had been receiving death threats from the criminals he owed money to, confirming that Helena's fears for his safety had been genuine. The palace staff worked tirelessly to manage the crisis, fielding calls from foreign governments, coordinating with security services, and preparing for the long-term consequences of the scandal. Lord Harrison, Edmund's trusted advisor, found himself at the center of a diplomatic storm, as allies and enemies alike sought to understand how the situation would affect their relationships with Ravencrest. As evening fell, Edmund addressed the nation once again, this time from his private study rather than the formal throne room. He spoke about the difficulty of the decision he had made, acknowledging the pain it had caused while reaffirming his commitment to protecting the kingdom's interests. His words were heavy with emotion, revealing the personal cost of his choice while maintaining the dignity expected of a king. 3 weeks had passed since Helena's departure, but the palace still felt empty and cold. King Edmund struggled to maintain his daily routines while dealing with the ongoing fallout from the scandal. Every morning brought new challenges as foreign ministers requested meetings, security briefings revealed additional complications, and public opinion polls showed a deeply divided nation. The investigation into Ambassador Petrov's activities had uncovered a sophisticated espionage network that extended far beyond Helena's involvement. Intelligence agencies discovered that Valdoria had been targeting multiple high-ranking officials across several kingdoms, using blackmail and coercion to gather sensitive information. Helena's case was just one part of a much larger operation that threatened regional security. Edmund found himself working longer hours than ever before, meeting with security chiefs, diplomatic representatives, and legal advisors as they worked to assess and repair the damage. Trade agreements had been suspended pending security reviews, military cooperation programs were being reevaluated, and several international conferences had been postponed while governments assessed the implications of the intelligence breach. The public reaction continued to evolve as more details emerged about Helena's situation. Initial anger began to give way to a more nuanced understanding of the impossible choice she had faced. Many citizens started to view her as a victim of sophisticated manipulation rather than a simple traitor, though opinions remained deeply divided across different segments of society. Helena, meanwhile, had settled into a small apartment in the neutral country of Montclair, far from the luxury and grandeur of palace life. She spent her days reading, writing, and volunteering at a local charity that helped refugees and displaced persons. The work provided some sense of purpose, though she struggled with depression and isolation as she adjusted to her new reality. Letters and messages of support began reaching Helena through carefully monitored channels. Many came from ordinary citizens who had been touched by her charitable work during her time as queen consort. Children from the hospital where she had volunteered sent drawings and notes, reminding her that her positive impact on their lives remained real despite the scandal that had ended her royal role. Back in Ravencrest, Edmund faced pressure from various political factions about how to move forward. Some advisors suggested he should remarry quickly to restore stability to the monarchy, while others argued that he needed time to rebuild public trust before considering any major personal decisions. The king found these conversations deeply uncomfortable, as his heart was still healing from the loss of his marriage. The palace staff noticed significant changes in Edmund's demeanor and behavior. He had become more withdrawn and serious, spending long hours alone in his study or walking through the gardens where he and Helena had once planned their future together. His closest friends worried about his emotional well-being, but he insisted on maintaining his royal duties despite his personal pain. International investigations revealed that Marcus's gambling debts had been deliberately created and manipulated by Valdorian agents as part of their plan to compromise Helena. The criminals he owed money to were actually working for Petrov's intelligence network, making the threats against his life real, but also serving a strategic purpose. This revelation added another layer of complexity to an already tragic situation. Legal experts began debating whether Helena's actions could be considered treason, or if her coercion by foreign agents constituted extenuating circumstances. Some argued that she should be allowed to return and face trial in Ravencrest, while others maintained that exile was the appropriate punishment given the security risks her presence would create. The debate reflected the moral complexity of her situation. Edmund received regular but limited updates about Helena's well-being through diplomatic channels. He learned that she was physically healthy, but struggling emotionally with the isolation and guilt of her situation. These reports brought him both relief and pain, as he wanted her to be safe but also wished he could provide comfort during her difficult adjustment to exile. The kingdom's relationship with its neighbors grew increasingly strained as the full scope of Valdoria's espionage activities became clear. Several countries recalled their ambassadors and demanded explanations, while trade relationships that had taken decades to build were suddenly called into question. Edmund found himself navigating a diplomatic crisis that extended far beyond his personal tragedy. As the investigation continued, evidence emerged that Helena had actually tried to minimize the damage caused by her forced cooperation with Petrov. She had provided outdated information when possible, and had refused several requests for more sensitive intelligence, despite increasing threats against her brother. These revelations painted a picture of someone trying to protect both her family and her adopted country under impossible circumstances. 6 months after Helena's exile, unexpected developments began to reshape the entire narrative of the scandal. Intelligence services from multiple nations had finally pieced together the full scope of Valdoria's espionage operations, revealing that Helena had been just one target in a sophisticated campaign that had compromised officials across dozens of countries. The evidence painted a picture of systematic manipulation that went far beyond anything previously imagined. A breakthrough came when Marcus, Helena's brother, was arrested by Valdorian authorities on unrelated charges. During his detention, he revealed crucial information about how the intelligence network had operated, providing evidence that Helena had actually been feeding false information to her handlers for the final 3 months of her cooperation. She had risked her brother's life to protect Ravencrest's most sensitive secrets, a fact that had remained hidden until his testimony. The revelation sent shockwaves through the international community and forced King Edmund to reconsider everything he thought he knew about his wife's actions. Intelligence analysis showed that the false information Helena had provided had actually helped Ravencrest's security services identify and neutralize several other Valdorian operations. Her betrayal had been real, but her attempt at redemption had been equally genuine and far more successful than anyone had realized. Public opinion in Ravencrest began to shift dramatically as news of Helena's hidden Resistance spread through media outlets and social networks. Citizens who had condemned her as a traitor started to view her as a hero who had sacrificed everything to protect her adopted country. Protest movements emerged calling for her pardon and return, while others maintained that her initial betrayal was unforgivable, regardless of her later actions. Edmund found himself facing the most difficult decision of his reign as pressure mounted from multiple directions. His advisors were deeply divided, with some arguing that Helena's eventual resistance proved her loyalty, while others insisted that bringing her back would set a dangerous precedent and could still pose security risks. The king spent sleepless nights weighing his personal feelings against his duty to the kingdom. International allies began pressuring Edmund to reconsider Helena's exile, arguing that her intelligence about Valdorian operations had been crucial in preventing attacks on their own nations. Several heads of state privately communicated their belief that Helena deserved recognition rather than punishment, though they understood the complex political considerations Edmund faced as her husband and king. Helena, unaware of the changing perceptions of her actions, continued her quiet life in Montclair. She had established a routine of volunteer work and had even begun teaching legal literacy classes to refugees, using her skills as a former lawyer to help people navigate complex immigration systems. The work provided meaning and purpose, though she remained haunted by guilt over the chaos her actions had caused. A secret investigation launched by Lord Harrison revealed that Helena had actually contacted Ravencrest's intelligence services months before her exposure, attempting to turn herself in and cooperate with authorities. However, the message had been intercepted by Valdorian agents who had infiltrated the communication systems, leading to increased pressure on Helena and threats against additional family members beyond her brother. The discovery of Helena's attempted confession changed everything for Edmund. He realized that his wife had been trying to find a way to escape the trap she had fallen into, and that her continued cooperation with Valdorian agents had been the result of escalating threats rather than ongoing disloyalty. The knowledge filled him with both relief and tremendous guilt over the decision he had made. Medical reports from Helena's time in the palace, previously overlooked in the rush to address the scandal, revealed signs of severe stress and anxiety that had been building for months. Palace physicians who had treated her for insomnia and depression now realized these had been symptoms of the psychological pressure she was under, providing additional evidence of her victimization rather than willing participation. As winter approached, Edmund made a decision that surprised even his closest advisors. He would personally travel to Montclair to meet with Helena, not as a king addressing a former subject, but as a husband seeking to understand what had really happened to their marriage. The announcement of his planned trip created a media frenzy and intense speculation about the possibility of Helena's return. The journey to Montclair was undertaken in complete secrecy, with only a small security detail and Lord Harrison accompanying the king. Edmund traveled under diplomatic cover, officially visiting Montclair for trade discussions while privately arranging to meet the woman whose exile had torn his heart apart. The reunion would either provide closure or open the door to an unprecedented royal restoration. The small cafe in Montclair's old quarter seemed worlds away from the grandeur of Ravencrest Palace, as King Edmund sat across from Helena for the first time in 8 months. Both had changed significantly during their separation. Edmund appeared older and more serious, while Helena looked smaller and more fragile, though her eyes still held the intelligence and compassion that had first captured his heart years ago. Their conversation lasted for hours, with Helena finally able to tell the complete truth about her ordeal, without fear of putting others at risk. She explained how the threats against Marcus had gradually expanded to include other family members, and how Petrov had used sophisticated psychological manipulation to make her believe that cooperation was the only way to keep everyone safe. Edmund listened with a mixture of heartbreak and admiration as he learned about her hidden resistance efforts. Helena revealed that she had developed a complex system of providing partially accurate information that would satisfy her handlers while protecting Ravencrest's most critical secrets. She had also been secretly documenting everything, hoping to eventually provide evidence that would help authorities dismantle the entire network. Her plan had been to confess everything to Edmund after gathering enough information to ensure justice, but Petrov's discovery of her activities had forced events to unfold differently. The meeting was emotional and difficult, filled with apologies, explanations, and the painful acknowledgement of how circumstances beyond their control had destroyed their marriage. Edmund expressed his regret over the hasty decision to exile Helena without fully understanding her situation, while she took responsibility for not finding a way to involve him earlier in her crisis. Both recognized that they had been victims of a sophisticated operation designed to tear them apart. As their conversation continued, Edmund shared the new evidence that had emerged about Helena's true actions and the changing public opinion in Ravencrest. Helena was shocked to learn that her resistance efforts had been successful, and that intelligence services now viewed her as a valuable asset rather than a security threat. The knowledge that her sacrifices had ultimately helped protect the kingdom provided some comfort amid the tragedy of their situation. Edmund made an unprecedented announcement during their meeting. He would formally request that Parliament consider a full pardon for Helena, acknowledging that she had been coerced into her actions and had ultimately served the kingdom's interests through her hidden resistance. The decision would be controversial and politically risky, but Edmund felt it was necessary for both justice and his own conscience. The news of Edmund's visit to Helena leaked to the international media within hours, creating a sensation that dominated headlines around the world. Speculation about a possible royal reconciliation reached fever pitch, with experts debating the constitutional implications of pardoning an exiled queen consort. Public opinion polls showed a narrow majority of Ravencrest citizens now supported Helena's return, though significant opposition remained. Helena's response to the possibility of returning home was complex and conflicted. While she longed to see the kingdom and people she had grown to love, she worried about the ongoing security risks her presence might create, and the political damage Edmund might suffer by championing her cause. She also questioned whether they could rebuild their marriage after everything that had happened between them. The parliamentary debate over Helena's pardon became one of the most watched political events in Ravencrest's history. Members argued passionately on both sides, with some viewing her actions as unforgivable regardless of the circumstances, while others saw her as a victim who deserved compassion and recognition for her ultimate loyalty. The proceedings revealed deep divisions within the government and society about justice, forgiveness, and the nature of patriotism. After weeks of intense debate and investigation, Parliament voted by a narrow margin to grant Helena a full pardon, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances of her case and recognizing her eventual service to the kingdom. The decision was accompanied by new security, protocols designed to prevent similar situations in the future, and a commitment to better protect royal family members from foreign manipulation. Helena's return to Ravencrest was deliberately low-key, avoiding the media spectacle that had surrounded her departure. She arrived at a private airport and was transported directly to a secure location where she could begin the process of readjusting to life in the kingdom. Her first public appearance would be carefully planned to allow both her and the public to begin healing from the trauma of the scandal. The reunion between Edmund and Helena marked the beginning of a long journey toward rebuilding their relationship and their roles within the monarchy. Both understood that trust would need to be earned again, and that the scars from their ordeal would take time to heal. However, their love had survived the ultimate test, and they were committed to working together to serve their kingdom while protecting their marriage from future threats. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy the monarchy ultimately strengthened it by demonstrating the royal family's commitment to justice, transparency, and the protection of their people. Helena's story became a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen in silence, and that redemption is possible even after the darkest betrayals. The palace no longer shook with scandal, but instead stood firm as a symbol of resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love to overcome even the most impossible circumstances.